Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Zach Parrish. I'm the programming librarian here at the Bexley Public Library. Just a couple of quick notes before we get started. This is a hybrid program, so for those joining in person, thank you for coming out to the library. For those joining at home, welcome. If we have any time for Q&A at the end, for those on Zoom, just type your questions into the chat and we will get them asked in the room. And then any question asked in the room, we'll try to repeat so that you know what was asked. Tonight, we are very lucky and honored to have two award-winning poets with us. First off, we have Beth Tornes, who has published 4 award-winning poetry collections, including Between the Dog and the Wolf, New Moon, and Snowbound. Her most recent collection, Northern Skies, was published in June 2022 from Muriel Press. She has been awarded residencies at MacDowell Colony and Yaddo Colony for the Arts. Her poems have been published in many journals and anthologies, including the American Poetry Journal, Boulevard, the Comstock Review, Main Street Rag, the Missouri Review, North American Review, Poetry Daily, Ploughshares, and Solstice Literary Magazine. Quite the spread there. So yeah, we can tell she's a very distinguished poet. She has also published a collection of Ojibwe oral histories entitled Memories of Lac du Flambeau Elders, which was published in 2014. She has lived in Lac du Flambeau, a Chippewa reservation in northern Wisconsin for the last 26 years. We're also happy to be joined by tonight by Kathy Fagan, who is the author of Bad Hobby, her most recent collection, and Sycamore, which was a finalist for the Kingsley Tufts Award, as well as 4 previous collections, including The Charm, the National Poetry Series winning The Raft, the Vassar Miller Prize winning Moving and St. Rage. Fagan's work has appeared in venues such as the New York Times Sunday Magazine, Poetry, The Nation, The New Republic, Best American Poetry, and the American of American Poets Poem a Day. She has received a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship and an Ingram Merrill Foundation Fellowship, and served as the Frost Place Poet in Residence. Fagan is also the co-founder of the MFA program at The Ohio State University, where she teaches poetry and co-edits the Wheeler Poetry Prize Book Series for the Journal and The Ohio State University Press. Thank you all again for coming out, and thank you for Beth and Kathy for joining us for a poetry reading tonight. I will turn it over to our poets.
Thank you, Zach. And thanks also to the Bexley Public Library. And to Beth, whose book, Northern Skies, I'm so excited to be opening for tonight. This is a truly beautiful book, and if you don't know it, you will soon. Thank you for joining us tonight. I truly am gonna be the opening act. I've had a handful of readings here in town for Bad Hobby, which came out in September, so I'll read 4 poems tonight from that book. This is, for me, an extraordinarily autobiographical collection of poems. It had as its genesis, my dementing father, who moved in with me in 2013. We aged together in my home for 5 years, navigating various American public healthcare systems, until his illness forced us to move him into a memory care facility, actually not terribly far from here. During that time, I lost my mother, came to terms with my own childlessness, as well as dealing with the lifelong discord I'd experienced as a first-generation college grandchild of immigrants, working class kid, among artists and academics, which, believe it or not, is something that I still deal with these many, many decades later. So you'll hear in only 4 poems, I think you will hear some of that. This is the opening poem to the collection. It's called Dedicated. The way I remember it, I caught beauty like a flu, via handshake or high five or a thank you for your service between the guys at the VA. The one who lurched toward me, touching me, saying, "You like poetry," more vision than question. The one who said, overhearing me correct my Korean conflict era dad, "Go easy, you won't have him long." Or the one who said, "You watch him like a hawk, just let him go." In the molecular biology lab, each tank full of impossibly small fish bears a sign that says, "You are responsible for your own deads." Plural, sure. The older I get, the more I am reminded of song dedications on the radio. I called cousin Brucey to send out "I've Got You, Babe" to my parents on their wedding anniversary. When he played them Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves, Bob and Marianne were understandably confused, but appreciative nonetheless. I myself have had 3 partners in my lifetime, and what I still love best about 2 of them is how I never had to explain that joke. There was all that time listening to radio or TV. TV turned internet. I wish I could dedicate those spent hours now to my mom, so she could come back a while. She wouldn't have to know she was dead, like we didn't know then how much time was passing. I would play with her hair like I used to, and tell her stories until she began to doze off, like she used to, waking only to say, "I didn't ever know you loved me, Kath. You never wanted affection from us, Kath." Just like she used to. The wrong song, somehow the right song, playing on and on like a perfect virus. And this is animal prudence. There's a little bit of French in here, but I don't think I need to explain it. Mice drink the rainwater before dying by the poison we set in the cupboard for them. They come for the bird seed, and winter is so gray here, the sight of a single cardinal can keep us warm for days. We'll justify anything. And by we, I mean I, and by I mean we. With our man is the only animal who, and our manifest destiny, killers each of us by greater or lesser degrees. Instead of a gun or knife in my pocket, there are 2 notes, on which the dandelion reads one. I don't know what it means, but cannot throw it away. It is soft as cashmere. The other says coffee, chocolate, birdseed. I should be extinct by now, except I can't make it onto that list either. Like toothpicks made of plain wood, some things are increasingly hard to find. Even when he was a young drunk, going deaf from target practice, my father preferred picking his teeth to brushing them. My mother preferred crying. They bought or rented places on streets named Castle, Ring, Greystone, as if we were heroes in a Celtic epic. Our romanticism was earned and leaned toward the Gothic, but lichen aimed for names on gravestones far lovelier than our own. It seemed to last a long time, that long time ago. Finches pixelating the hurricane fences, cars idling exhaust, dandelions bolting from flower to weed to delicacy, like me. Egyptians prepared their dead for a difficult journey. Living is more, I was going to say more difficult, but just plain more will do. Imprudent, unlike art, always falling below or rising above the Aristotelian mean. In France, a common rural road sign reads, Animal prudence, purely cautionary. It has nothing to do with Aristotle, but offers sound advice nonetheless. These days, I caution my father more than he ever cautioned me. He hears his oral hallucinations better and shows greater interest. Sportscasters at ball games, revelers at the parties he insists on. He's got all his own teeth, so toothpicks must do the job. His pockets fill with them. There are always half a dozen rattling like desert bones in my dryer. I think of the mason who chiseled his face in the cathedral wall. He couldn't write his name. The yellow bouquets I'd offer my mother by the fistful also got their name in France, Dent de Lion, meaning teeth of the lion. So two more. How's everybody doing? Good. Okay, excellent. This is the title poem, Bad Hobby. From his pocket, my dad pulls a roll of wooden toothpicks bound with a rubber band. We're driving to the VA to have his toenails trimmed, as we do every 3 months. A standing appointment, I used to say to him, but he no longer gets the joke. Someone does. Asking only why I can't do it myself. And why won't I? I've catheterized him twice, but can't bring myself to tend his feet. So like mine, wide with high arches, ballerina feet, my mom called them, none of us dancers. Now that he's lived with me for almost as long as he lived with her, I'm beginning to look like mom, pissed. The podiatry techs are always good-natured. Thank you, you can laugh. That's the truth, the God's honest truth. The podiatry techs are always good-natured, thanking dad for his service, raising their voices when I remind them he can't hear. The big toenail on his left foot looks to be made of horse hoof. They cut and file, but never hurt him. Some vets smoke outside the building, waiting on rides. Don't ever smoke, Kath, dad says. It's a bad hobby, scrambling his words, forgetting our ages and both our pasts. The toothpicks he saves and reuses, even when broken, he calls a bad hobby. And the drinking he once was well enough to do. Vets here age out at Korea. Most are Vietnam, Gulf, Iraq, Afghanistan. Since the suspension of the draft, only the poorest of us serve. Like sports, the art of war holds little interest for me, though both are everywhere on display. And in theory, I get it. Offense, defense, spectacle, competition. The Renaissance painter Uccello was commissioned by a nobleman to paint the famous triptych of the Battle of San Romano, a skirmish really between city-states, fought by mercenaries. More than the birds he was nicknamed after, he loved linear perspective, using mathematics to create a three-dimensional effect. The work hangs in 3 European countries now, in keeping with its divisive history, and is considered Uccello's masterpiece. Painted with egg tempera on poplar, it reminds me of the tarot with its broken staves like toothpicks and sexy horses. The gold leaf's intact on the bridles, but the silver of the soldier's armor has oxidized, darkening to ghostly shades. My mother's hobby was painting, is how I know. Uccello's daughter, a Carmelite nun, was described by Vasari as a daughter who knew how to draw. None of her work survives. Hobby derives from a Latin diminutive for horse, from which we get hobby horse, as in one man's sport, another man's war. On the other hand, habit is defined as a sustained appearance or condition, from habeo, meaning I have, hold, keep, known in some cases as hard to break or more useful broken, a spirit, a promise, a horse. And this is the last poem, and actually the last poem of the book also. Thank you for being patient and attentive. Inactive fault with echoes. Rain won't fall, and won't. When I learned the word virga, I learned how full a cloud could be. Every word worth an extended visit. Visit meaning to both comfort and afflict. Small fingers falling, not falling. Smaller even than curbside locust leaves. I had a wife once, Dad says. Whatever happened to your mother? There's a fault near here that hasn't moved in 30 years. We are our own seismic shift. Vertical lines on my fingers could be my mother's. Leaves don't change as much as crisp in this weather. Catalpa twists in place. We cause pain and relief from pain. The rain won't fall. Whatever happened to your mother? was probably my fault, Dad says. Remembering is dangerous, he says, when I remind him. My small fingers once recoiled from amoebas pictured in the science book. The breasts of the women at his facility rest quietly on their bellies, ghost bellies, their elbow and earlobes. I lost her somehow, Dad says. The van there reads, Angels on Assignment. Catalpa twists in place. Its many green ears follow a voice as you leave. Visit me soon. I want the earth to lose us first. Thank you. And now, the woman of the hour, our native poet, Beth Tornes. I think now I've lived in Ohio longer than you ever lived in Ohio. Is that right?
How long have you lived?
33 years.
You have it longer than you have it.
There you go. I rest my case.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. Thank you, Kathy. It's beautiful. And thank you all for coming tonight. I'm gonna read standing up for a little while, and then I'll sit for a little while, but I'll try and project so everyone can hear me. Can everyone hear me?
No.
Okay. Not too well?
No.
Okay, I'll speak up. So as Kathy mentioned, this is my newest book, and we met last summer for lunch and discovered that we both had books coming out. So that's why we planned this reading together. And it's wonderful to see and hear her poetry again. We went to the University of Utah together and worked on our PhDs at the same time. So it's a real pleasure to be reading together again. And thank you, Zach, for arranging this reading. As Zach mentioned, I have lived for the past 26 years, almost as long as Kathy's lived in Columbus. I've lived on an Ojibwe reservation in northern Wisconsin. And if you can picture a place with dense pine forests, lots of lakes and rivers everywhere, and right now covered with about 6 inches of snow, that's where we live, my husband, Bill, and I. And so many of these poems are set in Lac du Flambeau, the community I just described. And many of them are also autobiographical. So it's kind of a blend of both. And I'll, since we are in Columbus, I'll focus mostly on my Columbus poetry and read a few from about Lac du Flambeau as well. So the first one is called In the Old Village, and it's about the original settlement along the Bear River, where the Ojibwe first settled in 1745. In the Old Village. There are a few Ojibwe words, but I define the word right after I use it in a phrase or an expression, so you should be able to follow. A thunderbird perches atop the stop sign at Old Indian Village, wings uplifted. Fiery icicle feathers lit golden by sunrise, ready to fly to Ishpeming, where the Creator lives. Riva lived just down the road, and Jim Bell, the Labarges, Chapmans, Browns, and Cobbs, in small clapboard houses, wigwams in the summertime. They danced in the roundhouse to the heartbeat of the drum at the start of every season. They carried feast dishes, wooden bowls wrapped in cloth, to the medicine lodge, brought in beaver, otter, and ermine, skins, tobacco, sage, and cedar to heal the sick and the dying. This is where Anawabi, a powerful medicine man, walked behind a boulder and came out the other side, a large black dog, where Bearskin roamed the woods for days, following his vision of a red wool sock that he saw in the shaking tent, leading him to the man who'd gone missing for weeks, shot with a hunting rifle. This is where Riva helped her mother plant a vegetable garden every year. Corn, carrots, potatoes, beans, and rutabagas, where she played in denim farmerettes with dolls made of corn husks, where Celia helped her grandma weave mats of colored anakanakun, reeds dyed in berries, bark, onion skins, brilliant woven rugs, hanging on the clothesline to dry. Where Josephine's blind auntie asked her to thread needles, string different colored beads, and lay them out for her to fashion into moccasins and gloves. This is where the Brown sisters hung their beadwork in the window to sell to summer tourists driving past in Model Ts, when the dances started to draw white people from Chicago, Milwaukee, faraway cities on the train line. At Bear River, the seasonal dances became a show. Visitors took photos of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe people, to share with friends back home. They bought postcards and beaded gibiks, rabbit's feet that bring good luck. So they moved the ceremonial dances away from the dance grounds to the roundhouse. This is where school children walked the snow-filled streets. As teenagers, they trudged 16 miles to Lakeland Union High School, walking in the dark to arrive on time. This is where Ojibwe language was spoken, where people laughed and joked and told stories on winter nights. Tonight, I hear the drum pounding. It echoes across the lake. They're singing the songs their ancestors sang hundreds of years ago. Anishinaabe still gather in the roundhouse to pray for those who have walked ahead, those who are here today, and those who will be born tomorrow. This next poem is called Bear River Powwow Grounds, and it describes the powwow, the dance grounds that were mentioned in the previous poems, where they still have powwows every summer. And I'm going to sit for the rest of the reading because I'm more comfortable sitting than standing for a long time. So let me know if you can't hear me and I will project. Can everyone hear me so far? Okay, great. And this is also a Shakespearean sonnet, a form that I've played with from time to time. Bear River Powwow Grounds. In summertime, you can hear the river reeds hissing like snakes in the slanted rays of the sun. Observe the duck with eyes like onyx beads. Skirt the shoreline when day is nearly done. I walk down the bank where flowing waters rest and sit and hear a singing in my ear. A mosquito has found a downy nest. A little spirit roosts in my tangled hair. Evening arrives and stars begin to glide down the horizon. Night chills the piney air. On the shore where playful otters swim and glide, I pray in this peaceful, hidden lair. Solitude, my oldest, dearest friend, stay with me now until the end. This poem is about a ceremony that a friend of mine taught me, and it's called Winter Moon Ceremony. It's dedicated to a Potawatomi friend of mine, Kim Wenso. Winter Moon Ceremony. Take this glass of water and place it outside under the full moon. Let it purify, absorb the light for long hours. Then bring it inside, thaw out the frozen moonlight, drink it up. All at once you are healed, your pain is gone, your head is clear as the world lit up by Grandmother Moon. I'm going to shift to some more autobiographical poems. This poem is titled Morning Sun, and it's titled after my favorite Edward Hopper painting, which hangs in the Columbus Museum of Art, Morning Sun. I'll describe the painting in the poem, but as soon as you hear it, you'll probably remember this image. In my favorite Edward Hopper painting, a young woman in a peach-colored slip sits on a bed facing a window, bright morning sunlight pouring over her. She looks pensive, as if savoring a moment of peace. As she gazes past a brick warehouse, it could be downtown Columbus, where the painting hangs in a museum and where I first saw her as a child. At her age, 20-something, I wore a peach-colored silk kimono found in a downtown thrift shop, sexy and smooth to seduce my lovers. Today, I wear a red fleece bathrobe, sleep through long winters. This morning on my balcony, fresh snowflakes melt into stars that blaze in the spring sunlight, like gold stars on a schoolgirl's test, then quickly evaporate. Maybe I can pass this test, stay in the here and now, savor this moment in a lifetime of moments that disappear before my quickly fading eyes. This poem is called Summer Heat, and it's about a moment in every girl's life where her body grows into the body of a young woman. And all of a sudden she realizes that boys and men especially look at her differently. So it's about that moment in the life. Summer heat. I straddle my first bike, a red Raleigh 10-speed, and go for a ride in the country, zinging past tree-lined streets, past tennis courts and the Bexley pool, where cicadas buzz, past the mansion where Mr. Jeffrey hung himself. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I heard when I was growing up. Out to the rocky potholes, the asphalt roads which melt the tires, searing my nostrils with a burnt rubber smell as the heat reflects up and sweat puddles in my eyes. Grasshoppers spring from blonde grasses, fly into the spokes like 1,000 playful fairies. I stop at an intersection between two cornfields when suddenly a pickup roars behind me. The brakes screech, a red truck pulls up, 2 men drinking beers. The red-faced man in the passenger seat smiles. You want a ride, sweetie? No, thank you, I say, very polite, as I was taught to be. Screw you! They spit and laugh, gun the engine, roar down the road in an endless cloud of dust. I mount my bike, start pedaling again into the merciless light of my 13th year. This is a very brief poem called Family History, and it's about my maternal grandparents, who we called Nanny and Bert. Family history. My grandfather Bert, a German Jew, made us laugh. But my grandmother Nanny scolded us. Her high-pitched ocarina voice trembled as she spoke. Comb your hair, wash under your nails, say thank you, don't shout. Strict but loving, Nanny was raised Catholic, the red-cheeked, green-eyed younger child whose brother her German parents favored. When he found out she dated a Jew, her father beat her with his belt. The priests married them in the rectory, not the church, since Bert wasn't Catholic. At Christmas time, perfumes of cinnamon, ginger, anise filled their house. Her cookies, Lebkuchen, Pfeffernuss and Springerly, resembled her, spicy, crusty, hard to swallow, but dipped in coffee, savored over time, much softer, much sweeter. Bert owned a nursery business with his longtime partner, Walter. Every Christmas season, Bert brought home a tree, pine roping, candles and wreaths for Nanny to decorate. Every Christmas, we still bake Springerly in wooden molds from Germany, darkened by history. I'll just read a couple more, and this poem is about the other side of my family, the Tornes side, my dad's side, and it's dedicated to his brother, my Uncle Frank, and his wife, Paulette Tornes. And it's called Utah Beach. He served in World War II as an Army soldier, and he landed on Utah Beach. And my husband, Bill, and I were fortunate enough to go back and visit that place about 3-4 years ago, I think it was.
8.
Oh, was it? Time flies. Yeah, 8 years ago. So I wrote this poem after visiting Utah Beach. Utah Beach for Francis and Paulette Tornes. Uncle Frank, who used to hold me on his lap as a child and tell me I had a heart of gold, was 18 when he landed on Utah Beach. On D-Day +3, hefting an 80-pound pack. Imagine the terrible crawl across the wide sand beach, machine gun fire, shells exploding all around him. It was death's playground, the vast space between sea and field. Frank had to drag himself past his dead buddies. That was the hardest part, he said, seeing his friends lying there and nothing he could do. I wish I'd asked what kept him going. His faith, the long months of training, the instinct to survive. He had to reach the grassy hills. Like a lizard, he clung to the earth, pulled himself along. For weeks, they fought the Germans in Carrollton and Honfleur, the deep water port the Allies needed. They walked to Paris in August, where a red-headed beauty kissed him on the Champs-Élysées, the day the troops marched in to liberate the city. That was the day when history intersected my life. The redhead became Aunt Paulette, who combed my hair, spoke in a French that I always understood without knowing a word. T'es belle chérie, je t'aime, ma bichette. When I turned 26, Paulette asked her sister Martine if I could stay in their Paris apartment. I'd studied French, they'd moved to the country. Martine, a fashion mannequin, and Robert, décorateur, became my French aunt and uncle, their country home, my every other weekend harbor. Instead of one summer, I stayed 4 years in Paris. How I miss them all, Frank, Paulette, Martine, and Robert. How I long to see them in their pays natal, their homeland, the sacred place where all souls return. When my husband and I arrived at the wide stretch of beach the Allies named Utah, the sky was blue. A calm, blue-green sea rocked along the shore. 2 horses pulling cabriolets galloped past. I thought of all the young men darkest death had visited on that beach. How lucky Frank was, and how lucky we were he came back. You have to live one day at a time, Frank used to say. Car on sait jamais, because you never know. I think I'll just read 2 more poems. This one goes out to my parents, Yaddo and Jim Tornes, who are watching on Zoom. Hi, Mom and Dad. It's called Cherry Blossoms. A globe of white cherry blossoms, a giant balloon lifting, filled the sky above my parents' driveway when we drove up in early April. After hugs and unpacking, I parked my white Nissan under the Yoshino cherry, camouflage for a week, away from the world's troubles. I cooked dinners with my mother, repaired porch screens with my father, and hiked with my husband on the river road where the Kukosin sings over rocks. One evening, a storm blew in. Like snowflakes, cherry petals flew in a gust of wind. A steady rain scattered more delicate petals over the sodden earth. When I pulled up to the house to load our bags, hundreds of rain-wet petals littered the car's windshield, hood, and doors, tokens of life's abundance in its brevity. They melded us into the blossoming landscape, the green hills above the river. I wanted to stay to hold my parents in my arms, never let them go. Nearly 100 years old, I know I'll have to release them soon, just as the cherry releases her fragile blossoms to the earth. Nothing so beautiful can last forever. As we drove west, the white petals caught in the windshield wipers. And I'll end with the last poem in the book, which returns back to life on the reservation. It's called Blueberrying at the Tribal Farm. So the tribe has both a strawberry farm and the blueberry farm across the street, and they open it up for everybody to pick in the summer, which is very nice. And so this is about picking blueberries. They hang in grape-like knotted clusters of white, pink, lavender, and dusty blue neon, miniature bouquets hidden by shiny leaves. I greet a woman in a long, bright-colored skirt, picking in the row next to mine. We talk about the weather, how big and abundant the berries are this summer, thanks to the generous rain and sunshine. She has gathered a cardboard trayful, brimming with green quarts of midnight berries. She'll give them to her mother, sister, aunties, make blueberry pancakes for the grandkids. If she can get the AC to work, she'll bake them a pie. She strolls over to talk to her sister at the row's end. Their laughter rings through the cool morning air, the sound of women laughing through the ages. I pick a ripe berry, explode its tart sweetness on my tongue. I remember the story Celia Defoe told me. She was my Ojibwe, my namesake, who honored me by giving me an Indian name. When she was a child, she and her mother went to pick blackberries one morning. As they picked, the bush writhed. She stood up, a black bear stared back at her. The bear was there first, so who were they to stand their ground? They grabbed their baskets, walked quickly away from the bushes, and returned to the village. I gather up my 2 quarts, one for us and one for Grandma Green, and head for home. Thank you very much for
Are you all right with taking a few questions?
Sure. Yeah.
That's a great question. And this is the first book in which I've written quite so autobiographically about my life and the life of my family. I do think that it's easier as one gets older. For one thing, family starts to vanish. So there's that. I'm not in danger of invading anyone else's privacy. Also, as I age, I realize that this is very much my story, not just my parents' story, but my own. They were, as parents are, extremely formative influences on me, as were my grandparents, who also appear in the book. They were Irish immigrants. I read a great deal of nonfiction, creative nonfiction memoir in order to write this book. The issue that I had as I was writing through my dad living with me and trying to negotiate that new life, not having lived with him since I was 17 years old, and certainly not ever having been a primary caretaker for anyone. I had to sort of write through that, but was I writing poetry? Was I writing literature? Was I keeping a journal? So I began to read a lot of creative nonfiction, particularly nonfiction by poets. Natasha Trethewey has an amazing, who's a poet, has an amazing memoir called Memorial Drive. That was very helpful. Rebecca Solnit, who's a journalistic essayist, has a beautiful book about her mother's dementia, book of essays called The Faraway Nearby. And so as I read more and more nonfiction, I realized that I not only had permission to write about these things that were so present in my life, but I was able to gain some perspective on those issues. Then the challenge was, how do I make poems out of it? This is not a nonfiction book. These are not essays, these are poems. And so then the challenge became, how do I put pressure on the language to make poems out of it? And that was another story. And so much of my writing left the book. In other words, I had to choose very, very judiciously. And then with the help of my editors, we sort of pared down even more. And I'm actually quite pleased with what I have, what I ended up with. And I urge my students now, even at much tender ages than my own, to sort of not be afraid to explore extraordinarily personal material if the spirit moves them to investigate it. It's not only incredibly therapeutic, but it's wonderful to share with other people and talk about. I mean, we all have had experiences with our parents, aging parents, illness, ourselves or with our family members. And it's been a truly beautiful experience these past few months to share those stories with people. Thanks for that question.
Ditto to what Kathy said. Kathy, you answered that beautifully. So I really don't have much to add except to say that, you know, we all, as Kathy was saying, we all see our own histories through our own eyes, and our stories are our stories. And, you know, I think, as Kathy was saying, when that pressure is put on the language, the truth just kind of comes out as it's meant to come out. And so hopefully that results in a poem. Okay, that's an interesting question too. Yeah. Well, it's great to be back in the Bexley Public Library because I grew up reading in these rooms, and I was just describing to my Aunt Ruth and Uncle Keith the card catalog, remembering the card catalog that used to be in the middle of the room there, and coming in here to read and sitting at tables and working on essays for high school, and it's wonderful to be back here. So this building is an inspiration to me. Libraries, I love libraries, and librarians are wonderfully generous people who give so much of themselves. So thank you, Zach. And every other librarian. What brought my family to Bexley? We had been living out in Giiwedin, which at the time was the country, you know, it was woods and fields. It's very different today. But I believe my parents moved to Bexley because my dad wanted to be closer to his work at the nursery. He worked at Burroughs Nursery, which is mentioned in the poem, down on Main Street. For that reason, but also because they knew that Bexley had a good public school system. So I think for both of those reasons, we were very fortunate to move to Bexley. And I see some Bexley alumni here this evening. Thank you for coming. And let's talk after. So yeah, I feel very fortunate to have gone through the Bexley public education system, because it's a wonderful school system, and I have this wonderful resource here at my fingertips too. So
I thank you all for joining.
Thank you.